Basically, I was saying that we need much more innovation to address the challenge of climate catastrophe. And I was making the point that in certain European cities like Uppsala and Bristol, they run their buses on human excrement, right? Sometimes known as human feces or whatever you might call it. And I basically was saying, if European feces or excrement is good enough to run the buses, I refuse to accept that African feces is not good enough to run our buses. Okay, so basically it was to make the point that we have to be much more bolder in our thinking, much more creative in our application, and to be willing to try things that we didn't try before.
I mean, you have been an international peacekeeper and you're very well known and very accomplished. Tell me, what do you think are practical things that we could do, quick wins, to make sure that we are part of this new green economy?
Well, for individuals, as individual citizens anywhere in the world, we should look at our lives and look at what we can do to reduce our consumption, to reduce the impact we're having on the environment. This has to do everything on what we eat, how we travel, how we live, how we recycle our garbage and so on, right? So at the individual level, there are lots of things we as individuals can do to make a positive contribution, or at least to make sure that we're not causing harm. But that's not going to be good enough. That top-down effort is important, but we need bottom-up effort is important, but we need a top-down effort as well. We need governments to take leadership, to recognize that the scientists have told us we have 12 years to get emissions to peak and come down before we hit catastrophic runaway climate change. And so, given that reality, we need to do a whole range of things from government. Government must firstly say, we will not invest any fresh money into any dirty energies because we see they're killing our children's future. New investments should be going into renewables, to storage, to energy efficiency, and so on. And thirdly, to do it in a way that transition is just, fair, and doesn't punish the workers that work in the oil, coal, and gas industries, for example.
I mean, I was going to ask, how does that translate into developing countries that still need those harmful fossil fuels to actually just catch up to where the developed nations are?
So if you take telephones as an example, right? We in Africa could have said that, 95% of our people don't have telephone landlines, so we must get telephone landlines, right? But what we saw happen in Africa is that we leapfrogged the technology straight into advanced cell phones, right? And people don't bother with landlines anymore, right? So therefore, right now, when we look at the transition that we have to make, is that bottom line is who is going to suffer the most and who is suffering the most. It is the poor, it is the rural people, it is people who live in places where they're either vulnerable to sea level rise or other extreme weather events, right? So given that, we have to recognize that we cannot, as people in the developing world, bury our head in the sand and say, you folks in the rich country, you built your economies on dirty energy. True. We can't say, because you did it, we also are insisting we're going to do it, even though now we know for sure that doing it is going to kill our society, kill our children, kill the ability. It's just stupid thinking. So yes, it's not fair, and that is why in the climate negotiations, we pushed and insisted that there should be a substantial green climate fund that will fund developing countries to be able to make those transitions. It is not fair for the countries that benefited from dirty energy not to pay for, and it's not charity. We're not asking for charity. We're simply saying pay your climate debt that you owe to us, because we are paying the consequences in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, right? We are paying the price for the overconsumption and the dirty energy systems that were built up primarily, historically, in the developed parts of the world.
Are you making any traction on that demand?
Yes. The fact that I've said it now and you haven't ended the interview is a good start. No, I think the logic is spreading. There are many developing countries now have looked at the realities and have said, actually, it's not in our interest to continue to say, just because we have a little coal or a little oil, this thing, because we can make money, we'll just make money out of it. But the reality is, we are not making fast enough progress because we've got a very short window of opportunity, small window of opportunity, and that window is fast closing in terms of time.
Now, are there any innovations in terms of green, I should say, are there any green innovations that you've seen springing up on the continent that could help leapfrog us?
There are many, many things, right? So, for example, 4 young girls in Zambia 3 years ago, from the age of 13 to 15 for their science project, designed a generator, right, that can give you 5 hours of electricity run on 1 liter of human urine. Okay? That's one. In Nairobi, in Kenya, prisoners developed a way on how to use human feces, excrement, to generate electricity in the prison, right? We are seeing a lot of innovation in agriculture, right? We are going to have to rethink agriculture completely. We cannot depend anymore on rain-fed agriculture because climate change has impacted on our rainfall patterns, right? So, for example, you're seeing things like vertical and horizontal farming developing, where you're talking about doing farming without soil. You're talking about doing farming in a way where you use water more efficiently and so on, and these examples exist. The problem is the big agricultural economic interests or commercial agriculture, which actually does not benefit smallest communities, because most of that agriculture from Africa, for example, is for export market rather than for domestic use and so on. So we have to recognize that the people, the institutions, the big businesses that are making money from oil, coal, gas, deforestation for timber and palm oil and so on, are the ones who are resisting change, and too many of our political leaders are in the pockets of many of these very economic interests, and they do not have yet the political courage to push changes. And this is why we need every individual on this planet, especially those who are parents and grandparents, to recognize that they have a responsibility to their children and grandchildren to firstly read up quickly. It's not rocket science. You can get the basics of what climate change is and what you need to do about it. And if you really want to take care of your children and grandchildren's futures, get involved in the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change.